Bob, I got to tell you, MC Hammer invited me to his house again for dinner, and I hate going. You know why?
Why is that?
You can't touch anything. Get it? Can't touch this?
Can't touch this.
Yeah.
I've also got one thing for you to imagine.
What's that?
Imagine you're in New York. Imagine you're on the street. Imagine it's July and it's hot outside, so you're sweating a little bit, and you've got someone by your feet. And the person by your feet is telling you something that you can't believe. It's 1929. You're a master of looking for signs of what's coming in the market, and your name is JP Morgan. And your shoe shine person has just given you a tip on what you should be buying in the stock market. It was one of the biggest signals that he used of what was coming next. And so the question is right, how does something like that relate to what's going on now? One of the most fascinating stories, and I'm going to say that this has happened, I've seen in years, but this last week, DoorDash partnered with Klarna to allow their customers to split payments into 4 different payments. So again, I just want you to think about this and what it means for the consumer. We all love Chick-fil-A. You go to Chick-fil-A and you get your $5.99 sandwich and you add some fries and you've got a $10 meal. You add an
Look,
additional
it's 25 by the time we're out of it. Let's be fair.
It is, you get the fee. You get your $25 sandwich in your meal. Consumers right now are having a hard time paying that $25. And so not only do they need to split it into 4 payments, but they need to delay the payments. And so instead, that $25 Chick-fil-A meal now can cost them $50, $60 because they're so stretched, they can't afford that on what's coming right now.
So
That's
essentially,
the,
they've
that's the
allowed a
thing.
payment plan for Chick-fil-A to arrive at your house.
That's exactly right. And that was one of the big news stories of this week. And if that isn't a signal on how stressed the consumer is, I don't know what is.
That's as bad as layaway.
So the question is right, what does that have to do with Houston? What does that have to do with the housing market? What does that have to do with what's coming? Because again, you're a master of looking for signals on what's coming next, because that's how you add so much value to your client. So if you remember in our last session, I'm not going to go into all the details, but there's 3 big things that matter to real estate. Number 1 is the price of real estate. And as we saw last time, the long-term trend line, or houses over the long-term trend line, are a little bit more expensive, about 9 to 10% more expensive than quote unquote they should be when you look again at the average price of real estate nationwide. Number 2, the cost of money absolutely matters, and we've seen that. We've seen that, and fundamentally the mortgage rates are about the same as where they were a year ago. Dropped a little bit at the beginning of last fall, but fundamentally much, much, much more expensive than they've been a couple of years ago, and that's a big reason that people are staying in their homes as compared to COVID. And the third big thing that matters to real estate is employment, right? Because if people have jobs and people feel good about their jobs, then they'll spend money. If people don't feel good about their job, they don't feel good about their employment, then they don't spend money,
Bob,
right?
it's fascinating that you've just put this slide up, because the top result of the poll was what our agents are hearing is that affordability and high home prices are one of the top concerns that their clients are having right now. And this slide speaks to that.
You're exactly right. Because again, prices of real estate have been pretty high. Cost of money has been pretty high. Employment, again, from the government data that came out about a month ago, it says we're in a pretty good spot for employment. But there's a huge factor that weighs on that. One of the most interesting things, and again, I know most people, they try to avoid the news because it just gets them riled up, with the exception of my mom, who loves to sit and watch Fox News all day long and then send text messages about, right, what's going on and how great the country is.
I can't wait for her to visit.
Yeah, next week will be a lot of fun. But the White House has announced 8 major tariff policy changes in the last 56 days. So again, about every 7 days, there's been a massive change in the way that companies can source their products for supply chains. And again, really interesting analogy when you think about our friends in the oil and gas industry, and you take a great company like ExxonMobil, right? A lot of employment around town. They're thinking of building huge plants and huge facilities and huge money-making decisions that cost billions upon billions upon billions of dollars, that go through 4, 5, 6, 10, 20 reviews with hundreds of people working on it in order to create new jobs and to create new opportunities for the company. And again, opportunities for employment. And when they think of those decisions are typically in the range of maybe they'll make 15% return, maybe they'll make 18% return, maybe they'll make 20% returns. And those, again, are multi-year decisions. When every 7 days something comes out that would change the cost of inputs or change the cost of what you could sell products by 20% or 10% or 25%, it means that you don't know if you're going to be able to make that decision or not. Because again, if you try to make 15% and you just had a 25% tariff, it may make the project phenomenal because it means we can sell for more, or it may make the project not feasible.
Because you don't know if the tariff is going to help you or hurt you, and you can't plan out far enough. Sort of like going to the grocery store, and every time you're looking at the avocado price while you're standing at the store, it's dynamically changing, and so you can't decide if you actually want to make guacamole or not.
And that is exactly what has been happening. And so again, every 7 days, there's one of these massive announcements, and ultimately companies are paralyzed. They're like, what do I do? And the big thing that happens, and again, not only for companies, but this is for consumers, is consumers hate uncertainty, right? Most people, if you give them, I'm going to deliver some bad news, they're like, okay, give me a minute, I can take that. When you tell someone, you know what, I don't know what's coming, and it may be great, and it may be awful, and it may be a complete disaster, and you may get fired, most people are paralyzed. And so when you look at the data of what's come in the last month, consumer confidence has dropped to the lowest in 4 years. Now, one of the things you may remember from 4 years ago is right, that was COVID time. So, right, people are as scared to spend money as they are during COVID time. And that means, again, that there's a huge stop to what do I plan? What do I buy? What do I go out? What do I do? And fundamentally, where do I spend money?
Well, and Bob, let's talk about what consumer confidence really means, right? All of us on the phone are consumers. And, I don't know that I want to go out and buy my new car, even though it's time to buy a new car. And so what decision do I make? And now there's tariffs on automotive. So do I buy it? Do I not? So I'm sitting here with a major purchase that I'm unclear on. And so that trickles down lots of places. I mean, I imagine most folks on this call think about things in their life and maybe feel a little bit uncertain. And that's what this index measures, is how confident are we in the decisions to spend money or not. And what is interesting about all of this, I was on a call with Gary Keller yesterday. And when you look at the overall economy, when they sort of decide, is the economy functioning right in terms of, did we get the interest rates right? They look at unemployment, and unemployment sitting around 4.1, and that is in the realm of what they think is acceptable, right? You don't want too many people unemployed, you don't want too many people employed. There's this little sweet spot, and so we're kind of hanging out there. They look at GDP, how much are we growing as an economy? And there's a goal of kind of being around 2%, Bob, is that right?
Exactly right.
And we're sitting at 1.7. So we're not far off. I mean, we're not growing exactly, but we're still growing and we're close. And then they look at inflation. And while inflation is still out there, their goal is for that to be around 2%. And we're projected to be 2.9, 2.8 by the end of the year, way better than, 9, 12%. So those things are going pretty well. And yet, with tariffs and consumer confidence, those things are at odds. So it puts us into this realm of uncertainty.
Now, I know people are thinking, oh my gosh, Paige, there's a ton of data. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for my house seller? One of the biggest things for you to be able to think about and answer that question is again, we've seen a massive change in the market where the luxury market exploded by about 20, 24%, and the homes that are under $500,000 shrank. One of the biggest reasons that the luxury market has been growing last year, and we saw an incredible pop in December, is because the stock market value is up. So if you had a lot of money in the stock market, you made a ton of money if you were invested in US equities. In the last 3 weeks, about $5 trillion went away since the February 19th peak in the stock market.
Nobody likes that.
That wealth effect, right, just ran in reverse over the last month. And so again, at a federal level, a couple things to keep in mind as we go into the Houston and then the local data. One, we started this year looking a lot like 2024. Similar prices, similar cost of money, similar volumes.
Bob, can I just double down on that? On our call yesterday, that is exactly what the leadership at KW is also predicting, and so are the experts at Housing Wire, that 2025 is looking like a bang out mirror image of 2024.
And again, big thing last year is that luxury sales were up, driven by a lot of people feeling the wealth effect from the stock market. This story in the last 45, 50 days has been a story of uncertainty, right? You hear layoffs in the news, you hear inflation concerns in the news, you hear tariffs in the news, and it means that companies have a hard time planning. When companies have a hard time planning, they typically trim the fat, more announcements on layoffs. Consumers have a hard time making big purchases. Houses are a big purchase, and that shakes investor confidence. And fundamentally, that means that buyers have started to pull back. And again, what we're going to see in a second is we expect that to have a big downward pressure on prices. Again, story of money, story of uncertainty. However, and this is a big however, there is a potential silver lining if there is a problem with the economy.
Please, because we need some good news here, Bob. This is pressing as hell.
The slower growth, or right, if the economy slows, this is what the Fed's been working on for years, it may bring about lower interest rates. And so again, your trade-off on that is if the economy is really hot, the Fed said, hey, look, we've got to keep your cost of money high. The Fed says if the market might slow, well, then we may be able to give you a little bit of love by reducing the cost of borrowing. NAR this last week came out and said, now we expect mortgage rates to drop to about 6.1%. Why do I care? Why do I care if they're at 6.1 versus 6.5? Because historically, at 6%, buyers have re-entered the market. History shows this is when that there could be a big spike. And so again, your key message to buyers is, right, be smart, right? You're not trying to time the moment, you're trying to time the market. And in the market, over time, right, 10 years, 15 years, real estate appreciates in value because it's something that's a hard asset and it's not going to fluctuate crazy like the stock market has based upon news from Washington, D.C. But ultimately, your big question is right, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me as a real estate agent, and how can I help my clients? And fundamentally, that's the next section of what are we looking at for Houston itself. Now, one of the things as we go through this data is that these are the stages of a falling market. There's 6 stages. And this is, again, when you're looking for signs of what's coming and you want to help your client understand what's coming, this is the data that you want to be looking through. Stage number 1 of a falling market is that inventory rises.
So it's just how many more homes are on the market than normal?
More homes on the market. Number 2, you're looking at days on market increase, right? More things out there, they stay on the market a little bit longer. When things stay on the market a little bit longer, you're going to see more price reductions, right? Not everybody's going to reduce their price, but more people will reduce their price than had done a year or 2 years ago. Number 4, your number of pending sales will fall, right? Buyers pull back of future sales. Because pendings fall, obviously your top indicator for sales volumes, and so they fall. And then fundamentally, prices fall because those price reductions turn into your historical comps.
And y'all, this slide is so important for your sellers when you're meeting with them face to face and having the conversation, showing them what the stages look like and identifying where they are, so then that seller can make wise decisions. And also for your buyers, identifying where things are so they can take advantage and potentially find a better deal than they would have found, say, this time last year.
And so let's look at this data for all of Houston. And again, we know nobody lives in all of Houston. They live in a neighborhood, but this gives you a framework for a set of conversations on how you help your clients make wise decisions. So when you look again, what inventory means is if no new homes came on the market, how long would it take for every house on the market to sell out? And right now it's 5 months. Historically, we have been in a seller's market for the last approximately 8 years. This is the first time Houston has really been in a balanced market in 8 years. And it's the first time that most new realtors have ever faced a balanced market.
That's right. For those of us that are old on this call, we entered into a buyer's market or a balanced market. So we're back to the skills that we needed when we first started our career. It's been a while since we've seen it.
And here's the big thing I want you to be looking at as we go through these different slides, because you're going to see these in the future. 90 days ago, right? Look at how much the speedometer has moved since 90 days ago. That's a hint of what's coming. So again, number one is right, more inventory. Check. Number two, days on market. Days on market increase. The blue line, 2025, is higher than the other lines before. So check number two, we have higher days on market. Check number three, more price reductions. Yep, check, we have more price reductions than any point in the last 2 years by a pretty sizable amount. Number four, pending sales. Now, when you look at pending sales, technically, we just got under pending sales of where we were a year ago. Now, again, the reason it's going up to the right is because we're entering the spring season. So there's, again, a lot of seasonality at play. But the big thing you want to be looking for daily or weekly, it's where these charts are live on our website, you can go there every single day, is you're looking to see what that pending sales data does. Because the faster you're able to identify it, the better signals you have so you know what's coming, and the better job you can do with your clients. Again, we're going to look at this in a couple different ways in just a second, but for most of Houston, right, this is, again, pending sales have just notched down. Another part is home sales volumes. January, pretty darn consistent. February, we were slightly off. March, again, this is current data, is a lot of homes would have to close by the end of the month for us to be where we were last year. And so again, likely home sales volumes will be lower in March than March of last year, and home sales volumes were lower last month than the month before. So again, when you're going through your checklist, the thing that you're looking for next is home prices. Here's where we are in home prices. Now, again, this is monthly data, and you notice, you're like, oh my gosh, Bob, since July, the home prices have gone down. But again, remember, there's a big part of seasonality.
Right, that's seasonality, because you can place that right over the previous year and see that also typically prices begin to fall in the fall, and then start to pick back up in the springtime. So that is a normal cyclical market. However, Bob.
Right. However, we're not there on falling home prices, but when you go through your checklist of what's coming, you're looking for the tea leaves to be able to be 30, 45, 60 days ahead for your clients. Because the client, if we do enter the falling market and you're able to get them out first, your clients are the winners. You're the winner because you've been able to see the tea leaves better than other realtors. Mm-hmm. And so ultimately you get to the big question of, right, are we entering a declining market or not? Our belief is that we are, based upon the data and what's coming.
Now, Bob, can I also say this as well? We also don't see, and we didn't get into this time, we have in the past, we don't see a path where home prices crater 50%. So there is some level here of, when we're talking about declining markets and prices, we're not seeing that it's completely driving off the cliff, because there is still demand, but we do see it starting to trend the other way.
And again, this is the big one for most newer agents. If you haven't seen this before, because the last time we went through this was 2008 and 2009. And that's where, when you have a mentor who has, they can give you the signs of life of what's coming because they've lived that before. That's a big, big, big trend that we believe is coming that's new. Key is educating your sellers with honest, data-driven conversations, right? I know a lot of people like, oh, house prices can only ever go up. Oh, I remember from COVID. No, I need this price. Most sellers are not seeing the data that you're seeing because they haven't had the opportunity to have these honest, data-driven conversations. And this is where you add a ton of value.
That's right. And I think, guys, when you go in to have those conversations, I always like to couch it before I get there to say, I have some information and it's not good news. right? If I can explain, and I don't want to tell you this, but I'm not honest with you if I don't. So I'm going to have a very uncomfortable conversation. Most of your clients will be very receptive to the fact that you are being transparent and honest because they want the truth.
And the other big one is for buyer's agents, right? This is your moment. Paige, you want to expound on that? So this is where you lived as a buyer's agent?
I love being a buyer's agent. It's my favorite part of my job because in this market, the buyers actually finally get to be somewhat in control. They are the ones who have the buying power to buy. They have options of which they can shop. They're, again, when you make an offer 50% off list price, you're probably not going to be real successful, but you do have the opportunity to go in and be a hero with your buyers because this is the first time in a long time that they're not going to potentially have to pay through the nose for a piece of property. Now, that said, this is the entirety of the Houston market. We're going to look at some niches where that's not true because some of us that we're seeing, even with our listings, we've got some that we're getting multiple offers and going over list price. So it is important that you are able to guide your clients to understand that there are micro niches in our market and don't apply the national and Houston data to what's specifically going on into West University because those are not the same.
So again, what you're looking for is this is the same speedometer you saw for all of Houston, but you have it for different neighborhoods. And you see at the top, this is 1960 Cypress Creek North. On our website, every single geo market, you have this data. And this is what you want to be watching because it's changing. Now, again, what you want to watch is the difference between where it was 90 days ago and where the speedometer is now. That's the big thing to focus on as we go through this.
Because 90 days ago, we were in the fall. And so typically it makes more sense that in the fall, you would have, you would not have as much balance there, right? Because yes, homes come on the market in the spring, so a little bit of that makes sense, but you should be absorbing it faster because it's the springtime. And so the fact that we're not absorbing it, that is where you go, uh-oh, what is this that I absorbed more in the fall than I did in the spring?
This again, back to the analogy, you're in New York City, you're looking for the tea leaves before the fall of the Great Depression. You're hearing signs of what's coming. You're looking for the spread on what that looks like by neighborhood. So again, Cypress Creek North trending pretty close to the overall Houston average. Here's a market for Braeswood Place. Specifically, when you look at, they were in an extreme seller's market 90 days ago, but 3 months of inventory is pretty darn tight, right? You're still in a seller's market. Cypress South, right? Also, again, pretty narrow. You're still in a seller's market, but moving to the balance. And again, not that big of a move. So again, trending overall Houston average a little bit tighter. Here's a crazy one. Edo, right? Edo is been in a buyer's market, but look at how much it's moved into nearly an extreme buyer's market. 10 months of inventory. Again, that means nothing new came on the market in Edo. It would take 10 months to sell the houses that exist on the inventory now. Paige, again, if you are a seller, or you have a listing in Edo, what would you be communicating to the seller right now?
I think you go back to that checklist, right? You go back to those 6 points and identify where we are, and then have a very transparent, candid conversation with your client about what is more important, price or timing. And if they say both, the answer is that is great, but we can't be both. So which one would you rather have? And the challenge when they choose price and they stay where they are, the moment that the first people get out at those lower price points, because somebody's going to have to move and somebody's going to reduce the price and somebody's going to sell, that resets the comp. And so now where you're chasing the prices that down. And so do you want to lead that or do you want to follow that? Because the longer you sit on the market, the more likely it is that somebody ahead of you is going to get out at a lower price, and then that changes your value. Those are the conversations that you need to be having, of course, in a very kind and compassionate way to help your clients understand, because some of your clients say, I'll ride this out. This is no problem. I can lease it. I don't have to move. This is the information they need to know to make those decisions for their household.
Now let's flip it. Assume that you have a buyer your buyer's been looking around in the Heights, your buyer's been looking around in Montrose, your buyer's been looking in other areas, but they're really focused on getting a good deal. When
Well,
you look at those areas and you say, hey, look, right, for all of Houston, we're still pretty balanced, but there are pockets where you're in a buyer's market. How would you explain that to a buyer that may not normally be looking at Edo?
well, I think you also have the similar conversation where you bring the data to them and say, if it is important to you to get the best deal you possibly can, your two options are you find a house that's been on the market in a neighborhood that's oversaturated with listings and start playing ball and see who's going to play ball with you. Or you buy what we call the ugly Betty, right? You buy the ugliest house in the neighborhood and negotiate because you're going to fix it up. Those are your two options for the best deals in these kind of market. The flip side that you also have to share with them is if it is so important that you get the deal, but we're in an extreme buyer's market, Mr. Buyer, how long are you going to hold on to this house? Because this market is not going to just change in a year, right? If we've got 10 months of inventory in Edo and they are only there for a year, there's going to be a lot of these houses that are still sitting out there when they go to resell. So understanding their timing is going to be critical in this path because a buyer's market in lots of inventory, as long as you have time to hold, you're probably okay. But if they want the safer bet, then you look for the standards of, where are my good schools? Where are consistently a balanced or a seller's market, and work to buy into those, because that is where you have been able to preserve your value better over time.
And again, one of the best tips I give you, and this is how we start every one of our meetings, is the Phil Jones line. Send the text message to someone, again, buyers that might be looking not quite in Edo. This may not be for you, but I just got off a presentation and there are some pocket neighborhoods that have some unique deals. Would you be interested in learning more? Question.
And this may be a great neighborhood for things like investors, right? Where you can pick up some deals, have some tenants in there, make it cash flow as long as it can cash flow. That's what these kind of markets really can be designed to help your clients.
Airbnb, other activities.
Well, check on that first.
Fort Bend Southeast, the reason we highlighted this slide is look at how much the speedometer has moved. It's been an enormous gap from nearly an extreme seller's market. So if you have listings in Fort Bend Southeast, you are to be looking at the data and going it through with your sellers on a weekly basis, right? Normally, if a price reduction cycle might be every 21 days, this is where you're looking at 7-day cycles because the market's moving quickly. Heights, Greater Heights area, obviously very, very close and dear to our heart. That is also moving very quickly. This is one of the most extreme markets, and this is why we wanted to highlight it. The medical center 90 days ago was in a buyer's market, but when you look at this data, 13 months of inventory, right, speedometer all the way over to the right, this is a huge impact. This is also a huge area for looking for value. Paige, do you want to go through how you use this data on the 6 elements that you're looking at?
Well, I think you look at, okay, so you go back and say in that market, has inventory risen?
Yes.
Yes. Has days on market increased? Yes.
Yes.
We didn't show price reductions, but the likelihood of price reductions increased? Yes.
Yes.
We go to pendings, guarantee you those have fallen. Guarantee you sales volume has fallen because otherwise we wouldn't be in an extreme buyer's market. And if you start to look and compare, my guess is you're going to find that prices are starting to degrade a bit. And if they haven't, they certainly will. So, right, when you go through that checklist, this is a prime example of why you take this checklist in to meet with your sellers and your buyers, especially for your buyers that want a deal.
Last one, again, example Spring Branch, it hasn't moved that much. So again, this is an outlier on some areas that are not having a big
Well,
impact.
and that's a great example, Bob, of a neighborhood that has strong schools, great access to job centers. This is where you go, look, if you want something stable because you're unsure and you want to make sure that next time around that you have your best shot at losing less value and being able to get out when you need to get out, seeking these kinds of markets is really where you want to be focusing your clients.
Again, big things. We started looking like the same. luxury market surged by stock market gain. It's the story of uncertainty. And again, buyers are pulling back in those specific uncertain areas. One of the big things we wanted to highlight as an upcoming event, as we know that there's a lot of data, a lot of information, is Paige is going to be at a broker's open house next Thursday. It's going to be at a place in the Heights, an opportunity to ask anything. Paige, anything you want to highlight on that, or
Yeah.
we'll send out the invitation by
We'll send out
email?
the invitation, but if anybody on this call wants to come have deeper conversations about what the market looks like, come join us. It's a cool venue, and we'd love to see and chat with all of these fun data pieces and numbers. And we're also happy to strategize with you on if you've got a particular instance with a client and you want to mastermind around what you can do to help them. We'll have some brain power around that.
Fantastic. And lastly, there is the QR code for our next session on April 10th.
Yep.
If you have any other questions, please send them in. We will be able to address them both on the next webinar or in person together on the 3rd of April next week.
It's 9 o'clock. Thanks for having coffee with us on a Friday. Happy
Oh.
selling.